We want to take you to a live hostage situation unfolding in Bangladesh in the capital of Dhaka. There was an attack on the Holy Artisan Bakery. What we are hearing is at least 3 unidentified gunmen walked in, started firing, possibly shooting grenades, and then taking anywhere from 8 to 9 hostages, according to the police chief in that area. The hostages are largely believed to be foreign. This is an area that is a big foreign diplomatic compound, frequented by a lot of these folks. It's a little bit after midnight, almost 12:20 in the morning there. This has been going on for the past 3 hours. We believe at about 9:30 or so is when the hostages walked into this bakery and started firing. Security forces now have pretty much cordoned off that area. They are monitoring the situation, and the police chief, we're not sure why he did this, but just announced a short time ago that they are going to launch an operation to likely rescue those hostages and get them out of the area. I have on set with me Mike Baker, who's been talking about how the importance of keeping the hostages talking, Mike. But we were just surprised at why the police chief would announce that he's launching an operation before actually going in.
Yeah, I mean, unless they're absolutely 100% sure that there's no communication between the hostage takers and the outside world, it's not something you would typically recommend that the local police commander do. But he's done it. Again, they've got a heavy police presence, and particularly in this area where you've got a lot of expats and diplomats, as you pointed out. And they've pushed the perimeter out, so they've got it under control. And now it's just a matter of, are we going to get any sort of intel in terms of who the perpetrators are? But during the course of the negotiations, they will figure that out.
I want to bring in our Margaret Brennan, who's been following the situation. Margaret, what can you tell us?
Well, what we're hearing from the State Department is all U.S. Embassy workers are accounted for. Their exact status we don't know just yet, but I want to emphasize that Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, has a very significant presence of U.S. aid workers, not just typical embassy employees, but there are a lot of social programs that the United States has in Bangladesh. This is a very poor country. This is a country that often ranks among some of the most corrupt because in part of that poverty, and the U.S. has done a tremendous amount of outreach there. So given that this is happening, this event that's underway is happening smack dab in the middle of the diplomatic corridor, there is a very high likelihood that we have a number of Westerners inside of that bakery. I'm told that the owner of the bakery may still be inside. I can't account for exactly which diplomats or their families or other Westerners might be in that area, but this is an area where Westerners congregate because this is where their diplomatic missions are. So White House officials here say this event is very fluid. They don't have a lot of details that they want to make public at this time, but they are monitoring it. It is interesting to note that it was just yesterday that the U.S. Treasury and the State Department put out a notice saying that they are officially designating al-Qaeda's affiliate in the subcontinent because of one reason, they had recently killed and taken credit for killing an American in Bangladesh. It had also taken credit for killing a U.S. embassy worker there who people at the State Department tell me was quite beloved, had worked at the embassy for quite some time, and it was a very brutal death, having hacked him to death, broken into his apartment and hacked him to death. At the time that happened, there was speculation that this was an act of ISIS. Now you have this al-Qaeda affiliate, AQIS, it's called, al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, having taken credit for it. So it's not quite clear who might be holding this bakery hostage at this point, but I do want to point out that there is a known, acknowledged, and tracked presence of al-Qaeda in Bangladesh. Keep in mind, this is a country bordering India, right next to, and has a very difficult history with Pakistan. So there has been, some cross-border movement, some concern about cross-border movement of extremists in recent years in this area. But U.S. officials at this point aren't ready to say exactly who is responsible. They are tracking what's happening on the ground there, though.
Margaret, I know this is a fluid situation and it's still unfolding, but were there any sort of security warnings given out by the State Department for Bangladesh in particular, especially following the attacks in Turkey?
Well, in the months past, particularly following that brutal killing of the U.S. Embassy worker, this was back in the spring, you did see some warnings that Americans need to be on alert because there are people targeting foreigners and targeting Americans. This was going back into, I believe it was April and around the springtime that those were first put out because of that hacking. But in the past week, I haven't seen any warnings of an imminent threat. Doesn't mean they weren't made privately. What we also saw in the wake of that brutal murder, that hacking to death of the U.S. Embassy worker and another killing of an American there, you did see the Bangladeshi government under tremendous pressure, particularly from the American government, to get a hold of the situation. And you saw the government in Bangladesh rounding up thousands, literally thousands. I've seen ranges between 8,000 to 12,000. I'm not sure exactly what reality is in terms of who was arrested, but the U.S. Embassy basically went to the government in Dhaka, said you need to make some arrests and crack down on some of the extremists we're seeing there. So you have seen an effort inside of Bangladesh to get a hold of the situation. You've seen pressure from America to do that as well. Whether or not these events are related at this point, I can't say, but this has been a hotspot and there has been a lot of concern because extremists often flourish in these areas where there is poor governance, where there is little education, where there's not access to social programs, and where in the past they have seen exploitation of that by extremist groups.
Margaret, Brennan reminding us of the situation there back in the spring where an embassy worker was killed. And Margaret saying that the U.S. government has been putting a great deal of pressure to follow up and get the situation under control. Margaret, thank you for joining us.